A widowed billionaire walks into his empty guest house and freezes. A fat 17-year-old girl is sitting on the floor feeding his baby. His baby. The one he thought was gone forever. She's trembling, clutching the child like her life depends on it. "I didn't steal her," she whispers. "I found her crying. I couldn't leave her." In that moment, everything he knows about loss, guilt, and mercy is shattered. But when the police arrive and the world calls her a kidnapper, he does something no one saw coming. He stands between her and the world, risking everything to protect her. But why does this baby look so much like him? And what secret ties this broken billionaire, a lost girl, and an abandoned child together? When truth and faith collide, will compassion save them all, or destroy what's left of his life? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The November wind howled through the bare branches, pelting Henry Dalton's study windows with icy rain. He sat in his leather armchair, surrounded by the warmth of the fireplace and the quiet company of photograph frames. His fingers traced the silver edge of the closest one, Sarah's smile frozen in time, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. That had been taken just 2 weeks before everything changed. Thunder cracked overhead, making the crystal decanters on his desk rattle. The storm was getting worse. Henry glanced at his watch. 8:30 in the evening, and the darkness outside was absolute. The old Maine estate creaked and groaned under the assault of the weather, its century-old bones protesting against nature's fury. He picked up another frame, this one holding the last ultrasound image they'd gotten of their daughter. They had planned to name her Margaret, Maggie for short. Sarah had insisted on having the black and white image framed, saying it was their baby's first portrait. Now, 3 years later, it was all he had of either of them. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Henry set down his glass of water, frowning at the ceiling fixtures. The backup generator would kick in if needed, but he hoped it wouldn't come to that. The maintenance crew had checked it last week, but with equipment this old, you never knew. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint he first dismissed it as wind whistling through the weather stripping. But there it came again, rising above the storm's din. A cry. A baby's cry. Henry's heart clenched. His mind was playing tricks on him again. Dr. Matthews had warned him about this, how grief could manifest in unexpected ways, especially around anniversaries. Sarah and Maggie had died in November, after all. The crying grew louder, more insistent. Henry stood up, his legs unsteady. This wasn't in his head. The sound was real, and it was coming from somewhere on his property. He grabbed the emergency lantern from his desk drawer, a habit from Maine's unpredictable weather, and shrugged on his heavy coat. The crying continued, clearer now, coming from the direction of the old guest house. Nobody had used that building in years. After Sarah died, he'd shut it up, along with half the main house. Too many rooms, too many echoes, too many memories of the life they'd planned together. The rain struck him like tiny needles as he stepped outside. The beam of his lantern cut through the darkness, illuminating the path through his carefully maintained garden, now being battered by the storm. His shoes squelched in the wet grass as he made his way toward the guest house, trying to keep his footing on the slick ground. The crying grew louder as he approached. It wasn't just his imagination. There was definitely someone in there. The security system should have alerted him to any intruders, but the storm might have interfered with the sensors. The old key stuck in the lock, requiring a firm twist before the door creaked open. The lantern beam swept across dusty furniture and cobweb-draped corners until it found what he was looking for, and Henry's breath caught in his throat. A girl sat huddled in the corner, probably no more than 16 or 17. She was soaking wet, her dark hair plastered to her face, her oversized jacket dripping onto the hardwood floor. But it was what she held that made Henry's world tilt on its axis. A small bundle wrapped in what looked like a church blanket, the kind handed out at christenings. From it came the cries he'd heard, the unmistakable wail of a hungry infant. The girl's eyes met his, wide with fear, but containing a spark of determination. Her arms tightened protectively around the bundle as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't call the cops." She swallowed hard, her chin trembling. "She's hungry." Henry stood rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to process what he was seeing. The baby's cries softened to whimpers, and then, as if sensing his presence, a tiny hand emerged from the blanket, reaching up towards the light of his lantern. 5 perfect fingers spread wide, grasping at the air. It was the first baby's cry he'd heard in 3 years. The last had been Maggie's, so brief and weak before falling silent forever. Now here was another, appearing like a ghost from his past, reaching out to him on a stormy night that mirrored the one when he'd lost everything. His hands shook as he lowered the lantern, its beam illuminating the fear and desperation on the girl's face, the trembling bundle in her arms, and the small hand still reaching upward. A tableau that shattered the careful isolation he'd built around himself since that terrible November night 3 years ago. The baby's hand remained outstretched, a silent plea that pierced straight through the walls he'd built around his heart. In that moment, standing in the dusty guest house with rain drumming on the roof and wind rattling the windows, Henry Dalton felt something he thought had died with Sarah and Maggie. The stirring of compassion, the undeniable pull to protect, to help, to care. He stood there, frozen between past and present, as the storm raged outside and the baby's hand reached for him through the darkness like a tiny beacon calling him back to life. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the baby's softening whimpers and the persistent drumming of rain on the guest house roof. Henry's mind raced with questions, his years of careful isolation suddenly shattered by these unexpected intruders. "Who are you?" he finally managed, his voice rougher than intended. "What are you doing in my guest house?" The girl shifted, adjusting the bundle in her arms with practiced care, despite her obvious nervousness. "I'm Ella Mae Brooks, sir." Her voice was soft but clear, carrying a hint of southern drawl. I found her outside the Methodist church on Pine Street, 2 nights ago." She glanced down at the baby, who had quieted to occasional snuffles. "I couldn't just leave her there." Henry's grip tightened on the lantern. 2 nights? You've been keeping a baby for 2 nights without reporting it." "I tried," Ella protested, tears welling in her eyes. "But the police station was closed for renovations and the deputy on duty." She trailed off, biting her lip. "He didn't seem to care much. Said to come back during regular hours. I had nowhere else to go." The baby began to fuss again, and Ella reached into a worn backpack beside her, pulling out a nearly empty formula container. Her hands trembled as she showed it to Henry. "I bought this with my last $12. Been trying to make it last, but she's so hungry." Henry found himself moving closer, drawn by the infant's cries. In the better light, he could see how young Ella really was, probably 17 at most. Her clothes were clean but worn, and despite her size, there was a fragility about her that spoke of recent hardship. "Stay here," he said abruptly, turning toward the door. "I'm getting you both dry towels and something to eat. Don't move." In his kitchen, Henry's hands moved on autopilot, gathering supplies while his mind whirled. He should call the authorities immediately. That would be the sensible thing to do. Instead, he found himself heating soup, collecting towels, and even digging out some of Sarah's old blankets from storage. When he returned to the guest house, Ella had managed to quiet the baby again, but her own stomach growled loudly at the sight of food. She accepted the towels with murmured thanks, awkwardly trying to dry herself while keeping the baby secure. "Let me hold her while you get dried off," Henry offered, surprising himself. Ella hesitated, then carefully transferred the bundle to his arms. The baby looked up at him with bright eyes, and Henry felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. She was tiny, probably no more than a few weeks old, with a dusting of dark hair and round, curious eyes. "I've been calling her Maggie," Ella said softly, wrapping a towel around her shoulders. "I know I probably shouldn't have named her, but she needed something." Henry's breath caught in his throat. Of all the names. He forced himself to focus on the present moment, watching as Ella settled on the old couch and began to eat the soup with careful, measured spoonfuls, as if afraid it might be taken away. In the improved lighting, Henry noticed things he'd missed before. There were bruises on her wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, speaking of exhaustion beyond just 2 nights of caring for an infant. "How long have you been on your own?" he asked quietly. Ella's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. 3 weeks, she admitted, since they evicted Mama. She's been sick. The kind of sick that makes you forget about everything else. Her voice carried the weight of long experience. "I tried staying with her at the shelter, but..." She gestured vaguely at herself. "They said they were full. Said someone my size should be able to find work and a place of their own." The baby, Maggie, chose that moment to smile up at Henry, a toothless, trusting expression that hit him like a physical blow. She reached up, tiny fingers brushing his chin, and something inside him shifted irreversibly. He had been reaching for his phone, intending to call Sheriff Leland, whom he'd known for years. The right thing to do would be to report this, to let the proper authorities handle the abandoned infant and the runaway teenager. Mark would be discreet, professional. But as he looked at Maggie's innocent smile, at Ella's bruised wrist and haunted eyes, his finger hovered over the dial button. The numbers blurred before him. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the guest house. In his arms, Maggie made a soft, contented sound, settling against his chest as if she belonged there. Ella watched them both, fear and hope warring in her expression. Henry's hand lowered, the phone call unmade. He couldn't do it. Not yet. Not tonight. Something about this moment felt too important, too delicate to shatter with official reports and bureaucratic procedures. The storm continued its assault on the windows, but inside the guest house, 3 lost souls had found an unexpected moment of peace. Henry held Maggie close, watching as Ella finished her soup, each of them suspended in this strange pocket of grace, knowing that decisions would have to be made, but allowing themselves this brief respite from the world outside. His phone remained silent in his pocket, the sheriff's number undialed, as the rain drummed a steady rhythm on the roof above them. For now, that would have to be enough. The baby yawned, her tiny face scrunching up before relaxing into another smile. It was that smile that had done it. Henry realized. That innocent, trusting expression that mirrored another, baby's face from his memories. He couldn't bring himself to make the call that would send these 2 lost souls back into the storm. Not tonight, at least. Not yet. Henry walked back to the main house, his mind churning with decisions. The storm still raged, making any immediate action impossible. He found himself mechanically preparing the guest room, pulling fresh linens from the closet and turning down the bed, actions his housekeeper usually handled before he'd given her leave for the holidays. Just for tonight, he muttered to himself, smoothing the comforter. Until the storm passes. But even as he said it, something in his chest loosened, like a knot beginning to unwind. Back in the guest house, he found Ella had moved to the old rocking chair near the fireplace. She cradled Maggie with surprising skill, humming softly, some old hymn he half remembered from his own childhood. The fire cast warm shadows across their faces, and for a moment the scene looked almost like a painting. The young girl, the baby, the storm-lashed windows behind them. "The guest room is ready," he said quietly, not wanting to startle them. "It's warmer in the main house." Ella looked up, relief flooding her round face. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. I mean it. Most people—" She trailed off, adjusting Maggie in her arms. "Most people what?" he prompted, settling into an armchair across from her. She shrugged, a gesture that seemed to encompass years of experience. "They don't see past." She gestured to herself with her free hand. "I've always been the big girl, the one they laugh at. Mama used to say I was just built sturdy, like my daddy, but kids don't care about reasons." The words struck a chord in Henry's memory. Something about her name, about her mother. "Your mother," he said slowly. "Did she work in housekeeping?" Ella nodded. "She cleaned for all the big houses around here, including yours, years ago, before—" She bit her lip. "Before she got sick. I used to come with her sometimes, when I was little. I'd sit in the kitchen and do my homework while she worked." Henry's mind flashed back, a small girl with pigtails, carefully colouring at his kitchen table, while her mother, Linda Brooks, tidied the upper floors. The memory was hazy, from before Sarah's death, when the house had been full of life and staff and possibility. "I remember," he said softly. "You used to draw pictures of butterflies." Ella's eyes widened. "You remember that?" "Sarah, my wife, she kept one on the refrigerator for months." The words hurt less than he expected them to. Maggie chose that moment to fuss, and Ella automatically reached for the formula bottle. Henry stood up. "Let me make you something to eat first, a proper meal." In the kitchen, he assembled sandwiches, finding comfort in the simple task. When was the last time he'd made food for someone else? The house had been so empty, so quiet these past 3 years. He returned with a plate, piled high with sandwiches and some warm milk for Ella. As she shifted Maggie to take the food, the baby's bottle slipped, sending a spray of formula across Henry's pristine shirt. Ella froze, horror-struck, but then Maggie let out a tiny sneeze, followed by a gurgling laugh. The sound was so unexpected, so purely joyful, that Henry found himself chuckling. The laugh felt rusty in his throat, but it was real. "I'm so sorry," Ella said, but she was smiling too, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "It's just a shirt," Henry said, surprised to find he meant it. The sound of laughter echoed in the hallway, such a foreign sound in this house of shadows and memories. They settled into a comfortable silence, broken only by the storm's diminishing rumbles and Maggie's occasional coos. Ella ate like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days, which Henry realized with a pang was probably true. Later, after showing them to the guest room, Henry stood at his bedroom window, watching the storm clouds break apart to reveal patches of starlit sky. The house felt different tonight. Not lighter exactly, but warmer, more alive. He could hear faint movement from the guest room, Ella's soft footsteps, Maggie's quiet sounds. The sounds of life in a house that had been too quiet for too long. His chest ached with familiar guilt, but something else too, something that felt dangerously like hope. In the guest room, Ella tucked Maggie into a makeshift crib fashioned from cushions and blankets. The baby was already asleep, one tiny fist curled against her cheek. Ella sank onto her knees beside the bed, clasping her hands together. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered into the darkness, "for leading us to this kind man. for giving us shelter from the storm, for keeping Maggie safe." Her voice caught. "Please help Mr. Dalton too. He seems so sad, but he has such a good heart. Amen." She climbed into bed, pulling the soft covers around her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly safe. As sleep claimed her, the storm outside finally settled into a gentle rain, washing the world clean. Through his window, Henry watched the breaking clouds, his reflection overlaid against the glass like a ghost. Upstairs, in a room that had been empty for 3 years, a baby slept peacefully, and a young girl whispered prayers into the night. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what the morning would bring. Morning light crept through the windows of Henry Dalton's estate, painting golden stripes across the kitchen floor. The rich aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the sweet, powdery scent of baby formula warming on the counter. Henry stood at the coffee maker, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot, his mind still trying to process the strange turn his life had taken in the past 24 hours. The quiet padding of feet made him turn. Ella May stood in the doorway, Maggie nestled securely in her arms. The teenager looked different in daylight, still nervous but less haunted than she'd appeared during the storm. She'd found one of the guest robes, clearly too big for her frame, but clean and warm. "Good morning," Henry said, keeping his voice soft. "Did you sleep well?" Ella nodded, bouncing Maggie gently as the baby made happy morning sounds. "Better than I have in weeks. Thank you, Mr. Dalton." "Henry," he corrected automatically, then gestured to the kitchen island. "Sit. I've warmed some formula for her, and there's oatmeal for you." As Ella settled onto a stool, Henry couldn't help but notice how naturally she handled Maggie. Every movement was careful, practiced, the way she supported the baby's head, how she tested the formula temperature on her wrist, the gentle murmurs she used to soothe the infant's impatient whimpers. "You're very good with her," he observed, sliding a bowl of steaming oatmeal toward Ella. A blush colored her cheeks. "I used to help at the church nursery before—" She trailed off, focusing on feeding Maggie instead of finishing the sentence. Henry understood. Before everything fell apart. Before she ended up alone with an abandoned baby in a storm. The kitchen phone's sharp ring shattered the peaceful morning. Henry checked the caller ID and his stomach tightened. The sheriff's office. "Henry Dalton speaking," he answered, turning slightly away from Ella. Sheriff Mark Leland's steady voice came through clearly. "Mr. Dalton, following up on that partial call from last night about a found infant, we need to file a proper report. State law requires immediate notification of child services in these cases." Henry watched Ella gently wiping formula from Maggie's chin with the corner of a soft cloth. The tenderness in the gesture made his chest ache. "I understand, Sheriff," he said carefully. "Of course we'll comply with proper procedure." But even as he spoke, something made him add, "However, given the circumstances, the storm, the late hour, perhaps we could handle the paperwork tomorrow? The baby is safe and well cared for at present." There was a pause on the line. "Henry." The sheriff's voice softened slightly. "I know what this might bring up for you, but we can't delay too long. First thing tomorrow, then." "Agreed. Thank you, Mark." After hanging up, Henry turned back to find Ella watching him with worried eyes. Maggie had fallen asleep against her shoulder, one tiny hand curled into the fabric of the robe. "They're going to take her away, aren't they?" Ella's voice trembled slightly. Henry sat down across from her. "Not today," he said. "And perhaps you could stay until we sort everything out. The estate could use some help, and it would give us time to make proper arrangements for both of you." The relief that flooded Ella's face made him glad he'd offered. "I can work hard," she said quickly. "I know how to clean, cook, Anything you need. Let's start with you getting settled. Henry interrupted gently. There are some old clothes in the attic that might fit you, and the guest room is yours for now. Throughout the day, Henry found himself constantly aware of the new presence in his house. The sound of Ella's footsteps, Maggie's occasional cries and giggles, the soft humming that drifted through the halls. It was simultaneously foreign and achingly familiar. By late afternoon, he discovered Ella in the library, carefully dusting the shelves while Maggie napped in a makeshift bed of cushions nearby. She was humming softly, a hymn that stopped Henry in his tracks. Amazing Grace, Sarah's favorite. The sight of her there, caring for both the baby and his neglected home with such natural grace, stirred something in him he thought had died with Sarah. The library had been Sarah's favorite room, and he'd barely entered it since her death. Now, sunshine streamed through the freshly wiped windows, catching dust motes in the air like floating gold. I hope it's okay, Ella said quickly, noticing him in the doorway. I just thought, it's such a beautiful room. It is, Henry managed. Sarah, my wife, she loved this room. Ella's face softened with understanding. The books smell like sunshine, she said simply. They shouldn't be hidden in the dark. That evening, as Henry made his final rounds of the house, checking locks and turning off lights, he paused at the guest room door. It was slightly ajar, and the sight within stopped his hand mid-reach. Ella had fallen asleep in the old rocking chair, Maggie secure in her arms. What caught his eye, though, was the quilt draped over them both, a patchwork of blues and creams that Sarah had sewn during her pregnancy, dreaming of the daughter they would never bring home. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the teenage girl and the baby wrapped in his wife's last creation. The moonlight through the window cast a gentle glow over them, and for the first time in 3 years, the sight of that quilt didn't fill him with unbearable pain. Quietly, Henry closed the door, leaving them to their peaceful sleep. As he walked to his own room, the house seemed to exhale around him, as if it too had been holding its breath for 3 years, waiting for life to return to its rooms. The peaceful routine that had settled over Henry Dalton's estate shattered on a crisp Wednesday morning. Henry was in his study reviewing documents when the distinct crunch of tires on gravel caught his attention. Through the window, he watched a police cruiser roll up his long driveway, followed by 2 local news vans. His stomach tightened. "Ella," he called out, his voice carrying through the old house. "Take Maggie upstairs." But Ella had already seen them. She stood frozen in the living room doorway, Maggie held protectively against her chest. The baby seemed to sense the tension, her usual happy babbling gone quiet. "Mr. Dalton?" Ella's voice quavered. "They're coming for her, aren't they?" Before Henry could respond, sharp knocks echoed through the foyer. He straightened his shoulders, years of business negotiations lending him a calm he didn't feel. "Stay here," he told Ella firmly. Sheriff Mark Leland stood on the front steps, his expression grave. Behind him waited 2 deputies and a woman Henry didn't recognize. She was perhaps 30, dressed expensively but with a desperate edge to her movements. "Henry." The sheriff nodded. "We need to talk about the infant." "Of course." Henry held the door wider. "Please come in." The woman pushed past the sheriff, her high heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Where is she? Where's my baby?" Henry's spine stiffened. "Your baby?" "Yes." The woman's voice rose shrilly. "That girl stole my daughter. I've been searching everywhere." From the living room came a small gasp. Ella had backed against the far wall, holding Maggie even tighter. The baby whimpered at the tension in her caregiver's arms. "There!" The woman pointed dramatically. "That's her! That's my Sophie!" "Maggie," Ella whispered. "Her name is Maggie." Sheriff Leland stepped between them, his calm presence a buffer against the growing chaos. "Mom, you'll need to provide proof of maternity. Birth certificate, hospital records. I have witnesses!" The woman interrupted. "People who saw that fat girl hanging around my neighborhood before my baby disappeared." Ella flinched as if struck. Henry felt something hot and protective surge in his chest. "Sheriff," he said firmly, "I must object to this woman's tone and accusations. Ella found this child abandoned outside a church. She's done nothing but care for her since." "A likely story," the woman sneered. "Look at her. Who'd believe anything she says?" Through the open door, Henry could see neighbors gathering at his gate, drawn by the police presence and news vans. Reporters were already setting up cameras, their lenses focused on his front door like hungry eyes. "That's enough." Henry's voice cut through the room like steel. "Sheriff, this woman has provided no proof of her claims. Meanwhile, I can personally vouch for Ella's character and her care of the child these past days." The sheriff nodded slowly. "He's right, Mom. Without documentation, we can't simply hand over the infant. This will require proper investigation." "Investigation?" The woman's face reddened. "That girl is a kidnapper. She should be arrested." "No!" Ella's cry was raw with fear. "Please, I'd never steal a baby. I found her. She was alone, crying. I couldn't just leave her." Maggie began to wail, disturbed by the raised voices. Instinctively, Ella started swaying, humming softly until the baby settled. The natural grace of the moment struck Henry. How many times had he seen her do exactly this over the past days? The woman took a step forward, but Henry moved to block her path. Outside, camera flashes sparked like lightning through his windows. The situation was spiraling into a media circus. "Sheriff," Henry said quietly, "I suggest we continue this discussion through proper, legal channels. In the meantime—" He drew himself up to his full height, voice carrying clearly to the reporters now clustering at his door. "If this girl is guilty of anything, it's of caring too much." The declaration hung in the air. He could already imagine tomorrow's headlines, the scandal of a reclusive billionaire defending a homeless teenager against kidnapping accusations. His reputation, carefully maintained through years of privacy, would be shredded. Henry found he didn't care. The sheriff considered for a long moment, then nodded. "Until this is sorted out legally, the child and Miss Brooks will remain here under Mr. Dalton's supervision. This property is private. All media and unauthorized persons need to clear out now." The woman spluttered in protest, but the sheriff's deputies firmly escorted her out. Henry closed the door on the chaos, turning to find Ella trembling against the wall, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to cause trouble. We can leave." "No." Henry's voice was gentle but firm. "You're staying right here where I can protect you both." Hours later, long after the police had gone and night had fallen, Henry stood at his study window. The lights of news vans still lined his driveway like predatory fireflies. His phone had been ringing non-stop with calls from old business associates and society friends, all wondering if he'd lost his mind. Upstairs, he could hear Ella's soft voice reading a bedtime story to Maggie. The sound wrapped around his heart like a warm blanket, chasing away the cold that had lived there for 3 years. "Let them talk," he whispered to his reflection in the dark glass. "I won't let her face this alone." In that moment, looking at the circus gathering outside his gates, Henry realized something had fundamentally shifted inside him. The careful walls he'd built around his grief were crumbling, replaced by something stronger, a fierce need to protect the unexpected family that had stumbled into his life. The media could speculate all they wanted, the neighbors could gossip and judge, but in this house, for the first time since he'd lost Sarah, Henry felt absolutely certain he was doing the right thing. The days following the confrontation settled into an oddly comfortable routine at the Dalton mansion. With Maggie's guardianship under official review, Henry insisted Ella move from the guest house into one of the mansion's spare rooms, a sunlit space that overlooked the garden she'd already started tidying. "It's too much," Ella protested when Henry showed her the room, with its queen-sized bed and antique vanity. Her fingers traced the intricate quilting on the bedspread. "Nonsense," Henry said firmly. "You need to be closer to help with Maggie during the night, anyway." The social workers came and went, filling out endless forms and conducting interviews. Through it all, Ella kept herself busy, as if trying to earn her keep. Henry would find her in the kitchen early each morning, Maggie secured in a borrowed baby carrier while Ella prepared bottles and organized the day's meals. One morning, Henry came downstairs to find fresh coffee brewing and the scent of cinnamon rolls filling the air. Ella stood at the counter, her round face flushed from the oven's heat as she drizzled icing over the pastries. "My mama taught me to bake," she explained shyly when she saw him watching. Before everything went wrong. Henry found himself looking forward to mealtimes. Where before he'd eaten alone in his study, now the dining room came alive with Maggie's happy babbling and Ella's quiet presence. She had a way of anticipating needs before they arose, a fresh burp cloth appearing just as Maggie spit up, a cup of tea materializing when Henry looked tired. The garden, which had fallen into neglect after Sarah's death, began to show signs of life under Ella's care. Henry watched from his study window as she worked in the beds, talking softly to Maggie, who lay on a blanket nearby, reaching for falling leaves. "The roses need pruning," Ella mentioned one evening, her hands busy with dinner preparations. "But I wasn't sure if I should." "Sarah loved those roses," Henry said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken his wife's name aloud in months. She'd be glad someone's tending them again. Ella nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I'll be careful with them," she promised. That evening, Ella insisted on making dinner herself, a proper thank you, she called it. Henry found himself drawn to the kitchen by the homey smells of pot roast, fresh biscuits, and apple pie. "It's nothing fancy," Ella apologized, setting the roast on the table. "Just good country cooking." But when Henry took his first bite, memories flooded back. Sunday dinners with his grandmother, family gatherings before success had complicated everything. The food was simple but perfect, seasoned with care and attention. "This is remarkable," he said, watching Ella's face light up at the praise. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" She ducked her head, smoothing Maggie's wispy hair. "Mama worked so much I had to learn young. And then at the shelter—" She trailed off, focusing on cutting her meat. Henry set down his fork. "Tell me about your mother," he said gently. Ella was quiet for a moment, feeding Maggie a spoonful of mashed potatoes. She tried her best. She finally said, "Cleaned houses, including yours once, I think. But after Daddy left, things got hard. She started drinking, lost jobs. Then the eviction." She shrugged, but Henry could see the pain beneath her casual gesture. "And you've been on your own since then?" She nodded, "Until Maggie found me." A small smile touched her lips. "Funny how God works sometimes." The mention of God might have once made Henry uncomfortable. His faith had vanished with Sarah and their baby. But watching Ella with Maggie, he felt something shift inside him. After dinner, they settled in the living room. The fire crackled warmly as Maggie played on her blanket, attempting to roll over. Henry found himself talking about Sarah, how they'd met in college, built his company together, dreamed of filling this house with children. "When we finally got pregnant after years of trying," his voice caught. "The delivery went wrong. We lost them both, Sarah and the baby, our daughter." He stared into the flames. "I couldn't bear to hear babies crying after that, couldn't look at young mothers with their children. I shut everything out." Ella listened silently, tears sliding down her cheeks. When Maggie made a happy gurgling sound, Henry realized something extraordinary. The baby's laughter didn't stab him with grief anymore. Instead, it felt like healing, like spring after a long winter. The next morning, Henry surprised himself by suggesting they drive into town for groceries. Ella hesitated, but he insisted. "We can't hide forever," he said, helping her secure Maggie in the car seat he'd ordered. The whispers started the moment they entered the store. Henry could see people pretending not to stare, could hear the hushed conversations behind raised hands. The scandal of the reclusive widower harboring a teenage girl and mysterious baby was clearly the talk of the town. Ella kept her head down, clutching Maggie closer as they moved through the aisles. But Henry walked tall, deliberately placing a protective hand on Ella's shoulder as they passed a group of gawking teenagers. "Don't let them bother you," he murmured. "Their opinions don't matter." She gave him a grateful look, straightening slightly. Together, they filled the cart with fresh vegetables, baby supplies, and ingredients for more of Ella's home cooking. Henry found himself enjoying the simple task of grocery shopping, something he'd delegated to his housekeeper for years. At the checkout, the cashier's eyes widened in recognition, darting between Henry, Ella, and the baby. Henry met her curious gaze steadily, helping Ella load their purchases while Maggie babbled happily in her carrier. As they drove home, Henry glanced in the rearview mirror at Ella, making silly faces at Maggie. The sight made something warm bloom in his chest, something he thought had died with Sarah. His house was becoming a home again, filled with the sounds of cooking, laughter, and life. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel like a man haunting his own life. He felt present, needed, part of something larger than his grief. The scandal mongers could say what they wanted. He knew in his heart that this unexpected arrangement was exactly what all 3 of them needed. The rhythms of daily life slowly transformed Henry's once silent estate. Every morning, the smell of coffee mingled with baby formula as sunlight streamed through windows that seemed brighter somehow. Ella had taken to rising early, determined to make herself useful while pursuing her studies. These were Sarah's? Ella asked one evening, running her fingers reverently over the neat stack of textbooks Henry had brought down from the attic. History, mathematics, literature. His late wife had kept them all from her teaching days. "Yes," Henry said softly, watching as Ella opened a chemistry book with careful hands. She always believed in the power of education. She'd be glad they're being used again. They established a routine. After Maggie's morning nap, Ella would settle at the kitchen table with her books, while the baby played nearby in her new portable crib. Henry found himself drawn from his study more and more, pausing in his work to help explain a difficult math problem or discuss a historical event. So the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, Ella muttered, chewing her pencil. But not actually on July 4th. That's right, Henry said, pouring them both fresh coffee. The actual signing happened over several months. When she got answers right, her whole face would light up with a proud grin that made her look younger, unburdened. Those moments stirred something in Henry, a sense of purpose he'd forgotten he could feel. One particularly challenging evening, as they worked through algebra problems, Maggie began to fuss. Without thinking, Henry scooped her up, cradling her while continuing to explain equations. He caught Ella watching them with a soft expression. "What?" he asked. She shook her head, smiling. "Nothing. It's just, you're really good with her." The words caught him off guard. warming something long frozen in his chest. As days passed, Henry noticed small changes throughout the house. Fresh flowers appeared in vases. The kitchen windows sparkled. Even his housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, commented on how much lighter the atmosphere felt. "That girl's got a good heart," she told Henry one morning, watching Ella sing to Maggie while folding laundry. "And Lord knows this house needed some joy again." The pediatrician appointment came on a crisp morning. Henry had scheduled it after noticing Maggie seemed to be teething, her usual sunny disposition occasionally clouded by discomfort. The waiting room was full of mothers with children, and he felt their curious stares as he sat with Ella and the baby. When the nurse called them back, she handed Henry a clipboard full of forms. He began filling them out automatically. Date of birth, estimated. Medical history, unknown. Guardian status. His pen hesitated over the last name field. "Dalton," he wrote, the letters flowing naturally before he even realized what he'd done. He glanced at Ella, but she was focused on keeping Maggie entertained with a stuffed animal. Dr. Chen was thorough, but gentle, praising Ella's careful attention to the baby's needs. "She's hitting all her developmental milestones," she assured them. Whoever her birth parents were, they must have taken good care of her early on. Ella's face fell slightly at the mention of birth parents, and Henry found himself stepping closer, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. After the appointment, Henry made an impromptu turn into the local ice cream parlor. Ella's eyes widened as they pulled into the parking lot. "When's the last time you had ice cream?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Maybe 6 months ago, at the shelter." Henry's heart clenched. Sometimes he forgot how young she was, how much hardship she'd already faced. "Well, that won't do. What's your favorite flavor?" Inside, Ella studied the display case like it contained precious jewels. Could I try the mint chocolate chip?" "You can try whatever you want," Henry said, nodding to the teenage server. "2 scoops." They sat at a small table by the window, Maggie secured in her carrier between them. Ella took small, savoring bites of her ice cream, as if making it last. The joy on her face made Henry glad he'd suggested the stop. "Can I tell you something?" she asked suddenly, setting down her spoon. "Of course. I've been thinking about what I want to do. You know, if I pass my GED. She twisted her napkin nervously. "I want to help people, the way you helped me. Maybe work with kids who don't have anyone looking out for them." Henry felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I think that's a wonderful goal," he managed. "Really?" Her face brightened. "I know it won't be easy. I'll need scholarships and everything, but seeing how different things can be, how one person being kind can change everything." She glanced down at Maggie, who was contentedly gumming a teething ring. "It makes me want to pass that on, you know?" Looking at them both, the teenage girl who'd shown up in his guest house that stormy night, the baby who'd broken through his walls with a single cry, Henry felt something shift into place in his heart. This strange, unexpected family had filled empty spaces he'd thought would stay vacant forever. He needed their presence, their laughter, their simple faith in goodness, more than he'd ever imagined possible. "You can do anything you set your mind to," he told her firmly. "And I'll help however I can." Ella's eyes welled up, and she quickly dabbed at them with her napkin. "Sorry," she laughed. "It's just, no one's ever believed in me like that before." "Well, get used to it," Henry said, surprising himself with the fierceness in his voice. He reached out and squeezed her hand briefly. "You're not alone anymore." As they drove home, Maggie dozed in her car seat, while Ella hummed softly along with the radio. Henry thought about the form at the doctor's office, about writing Dalton so naturally, as if it belonged there. maybe it did. Maybe some families were chosen rather than born, brought together by grace and circumstance, and the simple human need to belong somewhere. For the first time since losing Sarah, he felt truly, completely alive. The morning started, peacefully enough. Henry sat at the breakfast table, watching Ella help Maggie practice holding her spoon. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, catching the baby's wispy hair like a halo. But their quiet routine shattered when Mrs. Peterson, Henry's housekeeper of 15 years, burst through the door clutching a newspaper. "Mr. Dalton, sir, you need to see this." Her hands trembled as she laid the local tabloid on the table. Henry's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. There, in bold black letters, screamed the headline, "Billionaire houses teen and stolen infant." Below it was a grainy photo of Ella carrying Maggie into the pediatrician's office, her face partially hidden, but her size making her easily identifiable. "Oh no," Ella whispered, her face draining of color. Before Henry could respond, his phone began buzzing with notifications. Outside, car doors slammed and voices grew louder. He strode to the front window and saw what he'd dreaded, a growing crowd of reporters gathering at the end of his driveway, cameras ready. "Mrs. Peterson, please help Ella take Maggie upstairs," Henry instructed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "And call security. No one gets past the gate without clearance." As they hurried from the room, Henry's phone rang. It was Marcus Chen, his lead investor. "Henry, what the hell is going on?" Marcus demanded without preamble. "The board is in an uproar. We're getting calls about you harboring a kidnapper?" "It's not what you think, Marcus," Henry said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "The situation is complicated, but complicated? You're the face of this company. We can't afford complicated right now, not with the merger coming up." Through the window, Henry watched more news vans arrive. "I'll handle it," he said firmly, and ended the call. Upstairs, he found Ella in the nursery, tears streaming down her face as she clutched Maggie close. The baby sensed her distress and had started fussing. "I heard them," Ella choked out. "Through the window. They're calling me a fat freeloader, a charity case." Her shoulders shook. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should just stop right there. Henry cut in, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. He knelt beside her chair, not caring about his expensive suit pants on the floor. "Listen to me, Ella Mae Brooks. You are neither of those things. You're one of the most genuine, caring people I've ever met. But everyone's saying such awful things," she whispered. "Everyone doesn't know you like I do." He reached out and squeezed her hand. "They don't see how you get up early every morning to make sure Maggie's bottle is the perfect temperature. They don't know how hard you're studying for your GED, or how you remembered exactly how I take my coffee after just one day." Maggie reached out and patted Ella's wet cheek, making a concerned, babbling sound. Despite herself, Ella gave a watery laugh. "See?" Henry smiled. "Even Maggie knows better than to listen to those vultures." But the situation only escalated as the day wore on. Neighbors drove by slowly, some taking pictures with their phones. The local news ran hourly updates speculating about the mysterious teenager living in the Dalton mansion. Social media exploded with theories and judgment. By evening, Henry had enough. He called James Warner, his attorney of 20 years. "James, I need you to shut this down," he said, pacing his study. "And I want a DNA test ordered immediately. We need to prove Maggie's origins and clear Ella's name." "DNA test against what?" James asked. "We don't have the parents' samples to compare." "Then we'll run it against every database available. Missing children, hospital records, whatever it takes. There has to be a match somewhere. This won't be cheap, Henry." Henry stopped pacing, his jaw set. I don't care what it costs. That girl has been through enough. I won't let them destroy her reputation over this." After hanging up, he heard soft singing drifting from the nursery. Following the sound, he found Ella in the rocking chair, Maggie drowsy in her arms. The melody stopped him cold in the doorway. It was Sarah's lullaby, the one his wife had sung every night while pregnant with their daughter. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked quietly. Ella looked up, startled. "Oh, I heard it at church once, years ago. It always stuck with me. Is it okay? Should I not?" "No, it's perfect," Henry assured her, his voice rough with emotion. "It's exactly right." He watched them for a moment longer, this unlikely pair that had brought life back to his empty house. Maggie's eyes were closed now, one tiny hand curled around Ella's finger. Outside, he could still hear the distant murmur of reporters and see camera flashes through the trees. Stepping back into the hallway, Henry leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. "God," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "don't take this away from me too. Please, not this time." In the nursery, Ella continued to sing softly, unaware of his prayer. The lullaby floated through the darkening house like a promise, like hope made melody, drowning out the chaos beyond their walls. Henry's hands trembled as he held the envelope from the lab. 3 days of waiting had felt like an eternity. The morning sun streamed through his study windows, dust motes dancing in the golden light as he carefully broke the seal. His eyes scanned the medical jargon until they landed on the results section. The words blurred, then snapped into sharp focus. He read them again and again. "This can't be right," he muttered, reaching for his phone. "Dr. Reynolds speaking," came the crisp voice of the lab director. "This is Henry Dalton. I'm looking at the DNA results for Margaret Jane Doe, and I need you to explain something to me." "Ah, yes, Mr. Dalton. Fascinating case, actually. The infant shows no maternal match to either the teenage girl or the woman claiming to be the mother. However," there was a pause, "we found something unexpected. The child shares enough genetic markers to indicate a clear familial relationship with you, sir. Specifically, the pattern suggests she's your granddaughter." Henry sank into his leather chair, the phone nearly slipping from his grip. That's impossible." "Science doesn't lie, Mr. Dalton. To be thorough, I'd recommend a secondary test, but these results are quite clear." After hanging up, Henry sat motionless, staring at the paper that had just upended his world. His granddaughter. Which meant, "James," he barked into the phone moments later, "I need you to find my son." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of private investigators and databases. Finally, the picture emerged. Christopher Dalton, his estranged son, had indeed fathered a child during a brief relationship in Boston. The mother had given birth 8 months ago, but disappeared shortly after. No marriage certificate, no custody agreement, nothing but a trail of unpaid medical bills and an empty apartment. Henry ordered the secondary DNA test immediately. When those results arrived, confirming the first, reality crashed over him like a wave. He found Ella in the garden, watching Maggie crawl through the grass, reaching for dandelions. The sight of them, his granddaughter and the girl who had saved her, made his throat tight. "Ella," he called softly, "we need to talk." Inside, seated in the kitchen with mugs of tea growing cold between them, Henry told her everything. About Christopher's rebellion, the fights over the company, the final explosive argument that had driven his only son away 10 years ago. His voice cracked as he described watching Christopher's car disappear down the driveway, pride keeping him from calling out, from stopping him. I thought there'd be time to fix it," Henry said, staring into his mug. "Then Sarah got sick, and we lost the baby. And—" he drew a shaking breath. I didn't even know where to send the funeral invitation." Ella reached across the table and took his hand. Her touch was warm, steady. "And now Maggie is his daughter. My granddaughter." Henry looked out the window where Maggie was napping in her carrier, peaceful in the afternoon sun. "All this time she was family, and I didn't even know. Maybe," Ella said softly, squeezing his hand, "she's your second chance, with both of them." Henry turned back to her, seeing wisdom beyond her 17 years in her gentle eyes. "Both. To be the father you wanted to be for Christopher, and the grandfather Maggie needs now." Tears spilled down Henry's cheeks, decades of regret and fresh hope mingling. "I don't deserve it. Love isn't about deserving," Ella said simply. "It's about choosing. Every day." They spent the afternoon making plans. James would file for emergency custody, using the DNA results and Henry's resources to prove he could provide the best home for Maggie. They would also search harder for Christopher, not to force a reunion, but to offer one if he wanted it. As evening settled over the estate, they sat in the living room, watching Maggie play with her blocks. She had been pulling herself up on furniture lately, testing her balance with wobbly determination. "She's getting stronger," Ella observed, smiling as Maggie grabbed the coffee table edge. Henry nodded, unable to take his eyes off his granddaughter. Suddenly, Maggie released the table. She swayed for a moment, then lifted one tiny foot. "Oh my goodness," Ella whispered. "Is she—" One step, then another. Maggie tottered forward, arms outstretched toward Henry, a look of pure concentration on her face. "Come on, sweetheart," Henry encouraged softly, holding out his hands. "You can do it." 3 more steps brought her within reach. As Henry caught her, a sound burst from his chest, deep, joyous laughter that echoed off the walls. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that. Maggie giggled in response, clearly pleased with herself and her grandfather's reaction. She patted his cheeks with her small hands, and Henry hugged her close, breathing in her baby powder scent. Ella wiped happy tears from her eyes, watching them together. "Try again," she suggested. They spent the next hour encouraging Maggie's first steps, their laughter mixing with her delighted squeals. Each tiny footfall seemed to wake something in the old house, like a heart starting to beat again after a long winter's sleep. As night fell and Ella took Maggie up for her bath, Henry stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the echoes of those perfect little steps. They seemed to whisper of new beginnings, of paths home, of love that finds its way back no matter how long it takes. He touched the DNA results in his pocket, thinking of Christopher, wondering where he was tonight. Somewhere out there was a young man who might not know he was a father, who might not know his daughter was here, taking her first steps in the house he'd grown up in. The sound of Maggie's laughter floated down from upstairs, followed by Ella's gentle voice singing their nightly lullaby. Henry closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over him. Each tiny footstep, each giggle, each note of the familiar song seemed to echo through the house like a heartbeat, steady, strong, and full of promise. The morning had started so beautifully. Henry sat at the breakfast table, watching Ella feed Maggie her oatmeal while sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. The baby's giggles filled the room as she tried to grab the spoon, making Ella laugh too. "Someone's hungry this morning," Ella said, wiping Maggie's chin with practiced tenderness. She had grown more confident in her role over the past weeks, and Henry marveled at how natural they looked together. The doorbell's harsh ring shattered their peaceful moment. Martha, Henry's housekeeper, hurried in from the foyer. "Mr. Dalton, there are people from Child Protective Services here. They have papers." Henry's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "What?" Two stern-faced women in business suits appeared behind Martha, flanked by uniformed police officers. The lead social worker stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Mr. Dalton, we're here regarding serious concerns about the welfare of the infant in your care." Ella instinctively pulled Maggie closer. "No," she whispered, her face draining of color. "Please, no." "What concerns?" Henry demanded, standing up. "We have DNA proof she's my granddaughter. My lawyer filed for custody last week." The second social worker pulled out a tablet, reading from it. "We've received multiple credible reports about inappropriate relationships and possible exploitation of a minor in this household. Given your position of power and the age difference between you and Miss Brooks." "That's ridiculous!" Henry's voice boomed through the kitchen. Maggie startled at the noise and began to cry. "See how he's shouting?" the first social worker noted, writing something in her notebook. "This environment seems volatile." Ella tried to soothe Maggie, her own hands trembling. "It's not true," she pleaded. "He's been nothing but kind to us. He saved us." The social workers exchanged knowing looks. "Miss Brooks, given your age and vulnerable position, you may not recognize—" "Stop it!" Ella cried. "He's like a father to me. He's helping me get my GED. He's giving me a chance at a real life." But the social workers were already moving forward, presenting their court order. "We'll need to take the infant into protective custody pending investigation. Miss Brooks, as you're a minor yourself, we'll be contacting your caseworker about proper placement." Henry's mind raced. Who would spread such vicious lies? Then he remembered the smirk on his brother Raymond's face at last week's board meeting, his thinly veiled threats about the family trust. "This is my brother's doing," Henry growled. "Raymond's trying to discredit me to get control of the company." "Mr. Dalton, please step back," one of the officers warned. "Making accusations won't help your case." Ella was sobbing now as the social worker reached for Maggie. "Please," she begged. "She needs her formula every 3 hours. She won't sleep without her yellow blanket. We'll take good care of her," the social worker assured, but her voice was cold, clinical. As she lifted Maggie from Ella's arms, the baby began wailing, her little hands reaching back toward the only mother she'd known. Henry moved to intervene, but the officers blocked his path. He could only watch helplessly as they carried his granddaughter away, her cries echoing through the house. Ella collapsed into a chair, her body shaking with sobs. Through the kitchen window, they could see camera flashes as reporters swarmed the gates, drawn by the police presence. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching towards the sky like vultures' beaks. "Fight them," Henry said fiercely, kneeling beside Ella's chair. "We'll call James right now. We'll prove Raymond's behind this. No," Ella choked out. "Don't you see? Fighting will only make it worse." She gestured towards the window, where more reporters were gathering. "They'll twist everything. They'll say terrible things about you, about the company, your whole life's work." "I don't care about any of that." "But I do!" Ella stood suddenly, wiping her eyes. "You gave me something I never had before, a real home. I won't be the reason they destroy you." Henry grabbed her hand. "Ella, please!" But she pulled away, running upstairs. Henry heard her door slam, then silence except for the distant shouting of reporters outside. Hours passed. Henry paced the study, ignoring calls from the board of directors, from journalists, from everyone except James, his lawyer. The news was already spreading online. Billionaire's scandal, teen girl and baby removed from estate. Questions surround Dalton's relationship with minor. Sources revealed disturbing details. Raymond's handiwork was obvious in every poisonous word. When evening came, Henry climbed the stairs to check on Ella, but her room was empty. On the perfectly made bed lay a single sheet of paper, tear stains blurring the careful handwriting. Dear Henry, you gave me a home when I had nothing. You showed me what it means to be part of a family. That's why I have to go. I won't let them use me to hurt you anymore. Please don't look for me. Take care of Maggie. She needs her grandfather, even if I can't be there to see it. Thank you for everything. Love, Ella. Henry's knees gave out. He slid to the floor, clutching the letter to his chest as rain began pattering against the windows. The sound grew stronger until it matched the rhythm of his breaking heart. The house felt cavernous around him, every empty room an accusation. No more baby giggles, no more of Ella's quiet humming as she studied, no more warmth, no more family. Thunder rolled outside as the storm intensified, but Henry barely heard it. He remained on his knees, surrounded by shadows that seemed to whisper of all he'd lost. His wife, his son, and now Ella and Maggie, gone like morning mist in the cruel light of day. The rain fell harder, streaming down the windows like tears, as if the sky itself mourned with him. In the growing darkness, Henry clutched Ella's letter and wept for his shattered family, for the light that had briefly returned to his life only to be snuffed out by greed and malice. Somewhere in the storm, a baby cried in a strange place, reaching for arms that weren't there. Somewhere in the rain, a teenage girl walked alone, her small bag soaked through, her heart breaking with every step away from the only real home she'd known. And in a silent house on a hill, a broken man knelt in the darkness, wondering how he'd lost everything. Again. The grandfather clock in Henry's study struck 12, its hollow chimes echoing through empty halls. Henry hadn't moved from his leather chair in hours. Papers lay scattered across his desk, urgent messages, company reports, all untouched. The curtains remained drawn, casting the room in perpetual twilight. 3 days had passed since they'd taken Maggie. 3 days since Ella disappeared into the night. The silence pressed against his ears like cotton wool. His phone buzzed again, the 47th call that morning. Henry didn't even glance at it. Instead, his eyes fixed on the small yellow pacifier lying on his desk, forgotten in the chaos of that terrible day. He reached for it with trembling fingers, remembering how Maggie's tiny hands would grasp it. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, knocked softly before entering with a tray. "Mr. Dalton, you haven't eaten since yesterday." "Thank you, Martha, but I'm not hungry." His voice was hoarse from disuse. She set the tray down anyway, her concerned gaze taking in his rumpled clothes and unshaven face. "The garden needs attention, sir. The roses Miss Ella planted—" "Leave them." The words came out sharper than he intended. He couldn't bear to think about Ella's careful hands pressing those seedlings into the soil, her proud smile when the first buds appeared. Mrs. Chen hesitated, then quietly left. Henry rose stiffly, walking the halls like a ghost. Everywhere he looked, memories ambushed him. Maggie's stuffed elephant lay forgotten beneath the coffee table. Ella's GED study guides remained spread across the dining room table, her neat handwriting filling the margins with notes. In the living room, her half-finished quilt draped over the armchair, blues and yellows and greens carefully pieced together. She'd been so excited to learn, sitting cross-legged on the floor as Mrs. Chen taught her to stitch. "I've never made anything beautiful before," she'd whispered, running her fingers over the fabric. Henry's throat tightened. He picked up the quilt, inhaling the faint scent of baby powder that still clung to it. The house felt wrong without Ella's quiet humming, without Maggie's delighted squeals echoing down the corridors. His phone rang again. This time, he recognized his lawyer's ringtone. "James," he answered wearily. "Henry, we found her. Ella's working at Rosie's Diner in Brunswick, 2 towns over. Took the job 3 days ago." Henry's heart clenched. Is she okay?" "She's waiting tables, sleeping in the break room from what we can tell. Henry, she's just a kid. She needs—" "I know what she needs." Henry cut in. But she won't accept help. You read her letter. The company stock dropped another 8 points this morning. James continued carefully. The board is meeting tomorrow. They're talking about forcing you out. Henry laughed hollowly. Let them. None of it matters anymore. After hanging up, he wandered into the kitchen. Ella's apron still hung on its hook, the one she'd worn while teaching him to make proper biscuits. You can't rush good food, she'd explained, guiding his hands through the dough. It needs patience and love. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled out to his car, needing to escape the house and its ghosts. Without conscious thought, he found himself driving to St. Matthew's Church, where everything had begun. Where Ella had found Maggie on that stormy night, wrapped in nothing but a church blanket. Henry parked across the street, engine idling. The evening service was ending, parishioners filtering out into the cold November air. He watched them hurry to their warm cars and waiting families, feeling like an outsider looking in through frosted glass. Hours passed, the street emptied. Still Henry sat there, watching the church's stained glass windows glow softly in the gathering dark. How many nights had Ella spent huddled in that doorway before finding Maggie? How many times had she gone hungry while he lived in his mansion on the hill, blind to the suffering around him? Lord, he whispered, his breath fogging the window. I've failed them both. Show me how to make this right. The words hung in the cold air, unanswered. Around him, darkness settled over the quiet town like a shroud. Inside the church, candles flickered behind coloured glass, casting rainbow shadows on the empty pews. Henry bowed his head against the steering wheel, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. In his mind, he could still hear Maggie's cries as they carried her away. Could still see Ella's devastated face as she watched her family being torn apart. His family. Somewhere in the night, they were out there. His granddaughter in some sterile foster home. His daughter in all but blood sleeping on a diner's break room floor. Show me the way, he pleaded again, voice breaking. Show me how to bring them home. The church bells tolled 9 o'clock, their deep resonance rolling over the deserted street. Henry lifted his head, wiping his eyes with a trembling hand. The dashboard clock reminded him he'd been sitting here for over 4 hours, but time had lost all meaning since they'd gone. A light snow began to fall, dusting the windshield with delicate crystals. Henry watched them melt, remembering how Ella had marveled at the first snowfall last week. She'd never seen snow up close before, had pressed her hand against the window like a child, eyes wide with wonder. The memory spurred him into motion. He couldn't sit here forever, drowning in regret. Ella and Maggie needed him to fight, no matter what his brother had done, no matter what it cost him. He owed them that much. As Henry turned the key in the ignition, his headlights illuminated the church sign. The message board read, "Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase." He stared at those words for a long moment, letting them sink into his soul. Then he put the car in drive, heading back to his empty mansion. Tomorrow he would begin climbing that unseen staircase, one step at a time, until he found his way back to them. But tonight the words of his prayer lingered in the cold air like frost, a father's desperate plea for guidance. Lord, show me how to make this right. The town hall buzzed with tension as cameras flashed and reporters jostled for position. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of concerned citizens who had come to witness the custody hearing that had captured their small Maine community's attention. Local news crews adjusted their equipment, red recording lights blinking like artificial stars in the stuffy chamber. Judge Valerie Kent sat at the elevated podium, her silver-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light as she shuffled through documents. The morning session had dragged on for hours, filled with testimonies from child services workers and character witnesses, both for and against Henry Dalton's fitness as a guardian. At the back of the room, Ella Mae Brooks slipped in quietly, her work uniform still bearing traces of maple syrup from her morning shift at the diner. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to make her large frame as inconspicuous as possible. Her heart ached to hear strangers discussing Maggie's future as if the baby were just another case number. The judge's gavel cracked against wood. "We'll now hear final statements before—" The heavy double doors swung open with a groan. Henry Dalton stood in the doorway, and collective gasps rippled through the crowd. Gone was the impeccably dressed billionaire they all knew. His silver hair stuck out at odd angles, his tie hung loose around his unbuttoned collar, and his eyes held the haunted look of someone who hadn't slept in days. "Your Honor," he said, voice hoarse but steady, "I request permission to address the court." Judge Kent studied him over her glasses. "Mr. Dalton, this is highly irregular. You're represented by counsel. Please." The word came out raw, desperate. "I need to speak the truth. All of it." Something in his tone made the judge pause. She nodded slowly. "Very well. Proceed." Henry walked down the center aisle, past the whispers and stares. His expensive shoes scuffed against the worn carpet as he approached the podium. When he turned to face the room, his hands trembled on the wooden surface. "3 years ago," he began, "I lost my wife and newborn daughter in childbirth." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "I thought I knew what grief was then. I thought I understood loss. But I was wrong. What I did was hide from life itself." The room fell silent, even the reporters' cameras growing still. Then one stormy night, a cry came from my guest house. Not the wind, not my imagination, but a real baby's cry. And there she was, this scared, brave girl holding a newborn, asking nothing for herself, only begging for help to feed a hungry child. Henry's eyes found Ella in the back. Tears streamed down her face as he continued. "That girl, Ella Mae Brooks, reminded me what love looks like when you've got nothing left but a hungry baby and a cold night. She showed me more strength, more faith, more pure goodness than I've seen in all my years in boardrooms and charity galas." He turned to address Judge Kent directly. "Your Honor, I'm not here to defend my wealth or my reputation. They can take my company. They can print whatever lies they want. But I'm asking you, I'm begging you, to look at the truth. That baby, my granddaughter, needs a family, and Ella is already more of a mother than anyone else could be." His voice broke completely then, but he gathered himself. "I failed my own son. I failed my wife. I won't fail them. Whatever it takes, therapy, parenting classes, supervision, I'll do it. Because that girl taught me something I'd forgotten. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about getting up every morning and trying again, even when you're scared, even when the world's against you." Ella pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Several other people in the room were wiping their eyes. "Your Honor," Henry concluded, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm not asking you to ignore the law. I'm asking you to see what I've seen, a miracle. A family being born in the midst of storm and scandal. Please, please don't tear them apart again." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Judge Kent removed her glasses, cleaning them slowly with a cloth as she considered his words. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Dalton, this court cannot make decisions based solely on emotional appeals, no matter how sincere." She paused, putting her glasses back on. "However, given the new evidence of biological connection and the unusual circumstances of this case, I am ordering a 60-day review period." During this time, both the baby and Miss Brooks will be placed in your custody, subject to weekly monitoring by social services." The room erupted in murmurs and camera flashes. Henry gripped the podium, his knees threatening to buckle. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you." As he turned to leave, his legs finally gave out. 2 court officers rushed forward to catch him before he hit the floor. Through his blurring vision, he saw Ella pushing through the crowd toward him, her face streaked with tears but glowing with hope. "Henry!" she cried out, kneeling beside him. "Are you okay?" He managed a weak smile, squeezing her hand. "I'm fine," he whispered. "Just fine. We're going to bring her home, Ella. We're going to bring our girl home." The reporters swarmed around them, questions flying like arrows, but Henry barely heard them. For the first time since walking into that courtroom, since losing his family years ago, he felt truly at peace. The truth was out. The fight wasn't over, but at least now they could face it together. Court officers helped him to his feet, leading him and Ella through the chaos of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Outside, the autumn sun broke through the clouds, warming their faces as they emerged from the courthouse. Henry leaned heavily on Ella's shoulder, emotionally and physically spent, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. The truth, he realized, hadn't destroyed him as he'd feared. Instead, it had finally set him free. The courthouse buzzed with tension as witness after witness took the stand. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Henry sat rigid in his seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, watching as the truth finally emerged. Sarah Miller, a waitress from the local diner, stepped forward first. Her voice trembled but grew stronger as she spoke. "I saw Mr. Raymond Dalton meeting with that woman, the one who claimed to be the baby's mother. He handed her an envelope full of cash behind the diner where I work." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Kent called for order, her gavel echoing through the chamber. Next came James Peterson, Raymond's former assistant. "Mr. Raymond Dalton instructed me to create fake documents," he testified, avoiding Raymond's burning glare. "He wanted to discredit both his brother and the girl. He said it was about protecting the family name, but really he just wanted control of the company." Henry watched his brother's face turn ashen as more evidence mounted. Raymond's carefully constructed plan was crumbling, piece by piece. The woman who had claimed to be Maggie's mother, Lisa Torres, finally broke down under questioning. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed, "Raymond Dalton paid me $25,000 to lie. He said nobody would get hurt, that it was just business." She turned to Ella, who sat quietly beside her lawyer. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." Ella's eyes were wet, but she nodded slightly, her innate compassion showing even now. The investigation had uncovered a trail of wire transfers, forged documents, and witness tampering. Raymond had orchestrated everything: the false claims, the media leaks, the manufactured scandal. His desperate grab for power had nearly destroyed 3 innocent lives. When the police stepped forward to arrest Raymond, he seemed to age 10 years in an instant. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, and Henry had to look away. Despite everything, it pained him to see his brother fall so far. "Raymond Dalton," the officer announced. "You're under arrest for fraud, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice." As they led Raymond away, he turned to Henry, his face twisted with bitterness. "You always were Father's favorite." He spat. "The perfect son, the successful one. I just wanted—" "That's enough," the officer said firmly, guiding him towards the door. Henry watched his brother disappear through the courthouse doors, feeling a complex mix of relief, sadness, and closure. The last piece of his old life was walking away in handcuffs, but ahead of him waited something far more precious. Judge Kent cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention back to the bench. Her usual stern expression had softened slightly as she reviewed the papers before her. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented today, this court finds that Miss Ella Mae Brooks acted not only legally, but admirably in her care of the infant Maggie. She paused, looking directly at Ella. Your actions, young lady, showed remarkable courage and compassion. Ella dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders shaking slightly. Furthermore, Judge Kent continued, given the DNA evidence confirming Mr. Henry Dalton as the child's biological grandfather, and considering his demonstrated commitment to both the child's and Miss Brooks's welfare, I hereby restore full custody of Margaret Rose Dalton to Henry Dalton. A collective breath seemed to release in the courtroom, but Judge Kent wasn't finished. Additionally, having reviewed Miss Brooks's character, her documented care of the child, and Mr. Dalton's petition, I am pleased to formally recognize Ella Mae Brooks as Maggie's legal guardian and godmother, with all rights and responsibilities therein. The words hung in the air for a moment before their full meaning registered. Ella's hand flew to her mouth, a sob escaping despite her best efforts to contain it. "Bring them in," Judge Kent ordered, and the courtroom doors opened. A social worker entered, carrying Maggie. The baby was wearing a pale yellow dress, her dark curls framing her cherubic face. She looked around curiously at all the people, then broke into a wide smile when she spotted Henry and Ella. Ella couldn't contain herself any longer. She ran forward, tears streaming freely down her face. Henry moved too, his long legs carrying him swiftly across the courtroom floor. They met in the middle, where the social worker carefully transferred Maggie into their waiting arms. "Oh, sweet girl," Ella whispered, pressing kisses to Maggie's cheeks. "We missed you so much." Henry wrapped his arms around both of them, drawing them close. Maggie reached up to pat his face, giggling at the tears in his eyes. The sound of her laughter seemed to fill every corner of the austere courtroom with joy. "You brought my heart back from the grave," Henry said softly to Ella, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of you did." Even Judge Kent was smiling now, watching the family reunion unfold before her. "This court is adjourned," she declared, but hardly anyone noticed. The drive home was filled with Maggie's happy babbling from her car seat and Ella's quiet sniffles as she tried to process everything that had happened. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, seeming to welcome them back to the mansion that had become their home. As they pulled up the long driveway, Henry noticed Ella wiping fresh tears from her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. "Nothing's wrong," she said, managing a watery smile. "It's just, I never thought I'd have a real home again, a real family." Henry reached over and squeezed her hand. "Neither did I." The mansion had stood dark and empty during their separation, but now light seemed to pour from every window. Mrs. Collins, the housekeeper, had prepared for their return, filling vases with fresh flowers and laying out a simple dinner. As evening settled in, they moved about the house lighting candles, their warm glow chasing away the last shadows of loneliness. Maggie crawled on a blanket in the living room, playing with her favorite stuffed elephant, while Ella and Henry sat nearby, simply watching her, drinking in the miracle of being together again. "We should take a picture," Ella suggested suddenly, "to remember this moment." Henry nodded, retrieving his camera. They gathered on the couch. Maggie settled contentedly between them and set the timer. The flash caught them mid-laugh as Maggie reached up to grab Henry's nose. Later, when that photo was developed, it would hold a place of honor on the mantel. 3 people who had found each other in the midst of storm and tragedy, their faces glowing with joy and candlelight, their hearts finally home. The weeks following their reunion flowed like honey, sweet, warm, and healing. Spring crept into Maine, bringing with it new beginnings that seemed to mirror the fresh start blooming within the walls of Henry Dalton's mansion. In the kitchen, the aroma of fresh-baked bread and cinnamon filled the air as Ella stood at the counter, her hands covered in flour. She had discovered her mother's old recipe box, tucked away in a thrift store, and spent hours recreating the comfort foods of her childhood. The kitchen, once cold and unused, now hummed with life and warmth. "Look who's trying to steal a cookie." Ella laughed, catching sight of Henry sneaking behind her. He had a guilty smile on his face, looking more like a mischievous boy than a billionaire businessman. "Can't blame a man for trying." He chuckled, snatching a warm snickerdoodle from the cooling rack. "These remind me of what my wife Sarah used to make." Ella's face softened at the mention of Sarah. "Tell me about her baking." "She believed cookies solved everything," Henry said, settling into a kitchen chair. "Board meetings gone wrong? Cookies? Bad day at school? Cookies. She'd say life's too short for store-bought happiness." From the living room came the sound of Maggie's delighted squeals. The baby had recently discovered the joy of mobility, though her version of crawling looked more like a determined wiggle across the plush carpet. Henry and Ella moved to the doorway to watch as Maggie inched her way toward a colorful stack of blocks. "She's getting faster," Ella observed proudly. "Soon she'll be running circles around us." Henry nodded, his eyes twinkling. "Speaking of running circles, how's the studying going?" Ella's face lit up. She had been spending every free moment preparing for her GED exam, determined to build a future worthy of the second chance she'd been given. "I finished the practice test last night, scored 87%. "That's my girl," Henry said warmly, squeezing her shoulder. The casual affection still surprised Ella sometimes. How easily they had become a family. How natural it felt to belong here. In the afternoons, while Maggie napped, Henry could often be found in his workshop behind the house. He had discovered boxes of old toys in the attic, wooden trains, doll houses, and rocking horses that had belonged to his son. With careful hands and patient determination, he restored each piece, sanding away rough edges and applying fresh paint. "This one was Michael's favorite," he told Ella one day, showing her a red wagon he'd just finished refurbishing. He used to load it up with rocks and leaves, pretending he was running a delivery service. His voice carried the bittersweet weight of memory, but no longer held the sharp edge of grief it once had. The townspeople, who had once whispered and stared, began to soften their stance. It started with Mrs. Peterson from the bakery, arriving one morning with a basket of fresh muffins and tears in her eyes. "I judged too quickly," she admitted, wringing her hands. "Can you forgive an old fool?" Ella, who had once been the target of the woman's suspicious glares, simply smiled and invited her in for coffee. Soon others followed, the hardware store owner bringing a handmade mobile for Maggie's crib, the librarian with a stack of children's books, the florist with bright bouquets and apologies. One particularly memorable afternoon, Ella found an envelope in the mail. Her hands trembled as she read the contents, then read them again to be sure. "Henry!" she called out, her voice wavering. "Henry, come quick!" He rushed in from his study, worried something was wrong, only to find Ella crying happy tears. She held out the letter, her acceptance to the local nursing assistant program. "I got in," she whispered. "They're offering me a scholarship." Henry hugged her tightly, his own eyes misty. "Never doubted you for a second." He took the letter and walked to the mantel where Sarah's photograph stood. With deliberate care, he placed the acceptance letter in a simple frame and set it beside his wife's picture. "She would have been so proud of you," he said softly, "just as I am." The following Sunday dawned bright and clear. Henry adjusted his tie in the mirror, an unfamiliar nervousness fluttering in his stomach. It had been years since he'd attended church regularly, but something had been pulling him back. Ella appeared in the doorway, wearing a pretty blue dress she'd found at the consignment shop. Maggie sat on her hip, dressed in a tiny white pinafore with matching ribbons in her dark curls. "Ready?" Ella asked gently, understanding the weight of this moment. They drove to the small white church where Ella had first found Maggie all those months ago. Pastor Jonathan greeted them at the door, his kind face creasing with genuine joy. "Welcome home," he said simply, and those two words seemed to heal something deep inside Henry's chest. They sat in a pew near the back, Maggie contentedly playing with a soft toy between them. The morning sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the wooden floors. As the congregation sang hymns Henry hadn't heard since childhood, he felt Sarah's presence closer than ever. When it came time for prayers, Pastor Jonathan's voice filled the quiet sanctuary. "Lord, we thank you for families built not by blood, but by grace. For the hearts that find each other in darkness, for the love that transcends biology, for the courage to begin again." Ella's shoulders shook slightly as silent tears rolled down her cheeks. Henry reached over and took her hand, his own eyes wet with emotion. Maggie looked up at them both, her small face serious, then broke into a brilliant smile that seemed to contain all the joy in the world. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, laughter echoed through every room of the mansion. Ella chased Maggie through the halls, the baby's giggles mixing with the sounds of dinner cooking and music playing softly from the old record player. Henry stood in his study doorway, watching his unexpected family. The house that had once felt like a mausoleum of memories now pulsed with life and possibility. Every room held new stories, every corner glowed with the warm light of belonging. Maggie spotted him and crawled over, pulling herself up on his pant leg with determination. "Pa," she declared, her newest word, learned just that morning. Ella appeared behind her, scooping the baby up and twirling her around. "Did you hear that? She's been practicing all day." Henry's heart felt too full for words. The gratitude that washed over him was profound, for the crying baby in a storm, for the brave girl who protected her, for second chances and the mysterious ways grace worked in the world. The evening settled around them like a gentle blanket. Through the windows, fireflies began their nightly dance in the garden. Inside, love filled every corner of the house, as natural and necessary as breathing. The morning sun painted the eastern sky in delicate shades of pink and gold, promising a perfect spring day. Dew sparkled on the fresh grass like scattered diamonds, and the sweet scent of blooming lilacs drifted through the air. Henry Dalton stood in his driveway beside his old blue pickup truck, watching as Ella nervously adjusted the driver's seat. "Okay, remember what I showed you about the clutch," he said patiently. "It's all about feeling the connection point." Ella's hands gripped the steering wheel at exactly 10 and 2 o'clock, her face a mask of concentration. "I don't want to break anything," she worried aloud. "This old truck has survived worse." Henry chuckled. "Just ease off the clutch slowly while giving it a little gas." From her blanket spread on the lawn, little Maggie squealed with delight as she waved her bubble wand, creating shimmering spheres that floated lazily in the morning breeze. Her dark curls bounced as she toddled after each bubble, trying to catch them. The truck lurched forward, then stalled, making Ella groan in frustration. "I'm sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for," Henry assured her. "Everyone stalls when they're learning. Try again." This time, Ella managed to get the truck moving smoothly down the long driveway. Her face lit up with pride as they rolled past the flowering cherry trees. "I'm doing it," Henry smiled, remembering teaching his own son to drive years ago. The memory, for once, brought warmth instead of pain. "You're a natural," he encouraged. They practiced for another hour, Ella growing more confident with each pass. The mansion that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with the sounds of Maggie's laughter, the rumble of the engine, and Ella's occasional whoops of triumph when she managed a particularly smooth gear change. As the afternoon sun began its westward journey, Henry suggested they wrap up the lesson. Ella parked the truck perfectly, beaming with accomplishment. "Thank you for teaching me," she said softly. "No one's ever taken the time before." Together they gathered up Maggie and her toys, heading toward the wide front porch where Henry had already set up for dinner. The table was laid with simple fare, fresh bread, garden salad, and Ella's famous chicken pot pie, still warm from the oven. The valley spread out before them in shades of green and gold, while purple shadows lengthened across the lawn. Maggie sat in her high chair, happily making a mess with her mashed potatoes as birds sang their evening songs in the nearby trees. "This house," Henry said thoughtfully, looking at the warm lights glowing behind them. "It was just a shell for so long. Now it feels alive again." Ella nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. It's amazing how love can bring things back to life. Henry reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. "Speaking of love," he said, sliding it across the table to Ella, "there's something I want you to see." With curious fingers, Ella opened the envelope and began reading the legal documents inside. Her eyes widened as she realized what they were: trust papers for Maggie, naming Ella as co-guardian and future trustee of the estate. "Henry," she whispered, her voice catching, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied gently. "You're family now, both of you. This just makes it official." Tears spilled down Ella's cheeks as she stood and wrapped her arms around Henry in a tight hug. "You never gave up on me," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. Henry hugged her back, his own eyes growing moist. "You never gave up on love," he answered simply, "even when the world gave you every reason to." As if, sensing the importance of the moment, Maggie chose that exact time to slide down from her high chair and toddle across the porch toward them, arms outstretched and giggling. The sound of her laughter echoed through the valley, pure and sweet as church bells. The mansion glowed warmly behind them, its windows bright with welcome, no longer a monument to loss, but a testament to new beginnings. Each room held fresh memories now, of bedtime stories and morning pancakes, of piano lessons and homework sessions, of prayers said together and tears shared in understanding. As the first stars began to appear in the deepening twilight, the three of them sat together on the porch swing. Maggie curled sleepily between them. The air was filled with the gentle symphony of evening, crickets tuning up their instruments, a distant owl calling, the soft creak of the swing's chains. Here was proof that love could build bridges across the deepest chasms, that faith could light the darkest nights, that second chances came wrapped in unexpected packages. Here was a home redeemed by compassion, made whole again by the miracle of hearts finding each other in the storm. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.